Hey everybody, welcome to Surface Level, curious conversations about the Black and queer experience. I'm one of your hosts, Jordan, and today, Tony, Damon, and I are discussing the harsh realities of HIV laws in the U.S. HIV criminalization laws. Can you just briefly explain what those are?
If you're a person living with HIV and you know that you're living with HIV and you engage in any type of sexual activity and you are accused of not disclosing that you're in fact HIV positive, then you can become criminally liable.
But I don't know, like you said, when's the point in which that information is provided? Because that would have probably impacted how I navigated disclosing.
Right. I think the conversation around sexual health should just be more holistic. The conversation is not just, are you positive or not? Me as a person that is negative, am I taking PrEP or not? Am I using condoms or not? Am I gonna get a PrEP prescription afterwards or some point? Am I getting tested regularly?
This is HIV is not a crime. All right. So we have an episode that we have been wanting to do for about a year now. And so I'm very happy that we can have this conversation with a very special guest that I'm going to introduce. So today's guest is a social justice educator with over 10 years of activism experience. He's a leading voice advocating for the rights of those living with HIV, with a specific focus on centering Black communities and communities of color. Through his consultancy, he works closely with leaders and advocacy groups to advance initiatives that promote awareness, drive social change, and support the reform of HIV criminalization laws. Today, we're honored to welcome Robert Suttle to our Surface Level family.
Thank you.
Yes,
Good to be
welcome.
here.
Well, yeah. This is going to be a good conversation, and I'm happy that you're here to have it with us to add some credibility to the conversation.
All right.
But before we go deeper into this conversation, let's start on the surface level with a game of this or that. So for anyone who's tuning in for the first time this season is all about sex and sexuality. And so the way that we're going to ice break this conversation is with a game called the Law of Attraction. All right. So I'm going to give a series of this or that options, and each of you will tell me what you're more sexually attracted to. All right, so we'll start in the order of Damon, Tony, and then Robert. All right, natural scent or fragrance?
No scent.
No scent.
That's not an option.
Because when you say natural scent, that I feel like we're getting into that area I don't like to be in.
So you don't like natural scent?
A person's natural scent.
But okay, I feel like when you say it in the context of sex, people talk about like man scent and stuff, and that's why I don't like that.
You don't like boy smells?
I'd like for you to smell showered, and I also don't really get into like colognes and perfumes in a big way, so that's why I said nothing.
Okay, so faster paced.
Yeah, no, natural scent, and I'm not thinking as meta as Damon about it.
I just want to clarify because I don't want nobody coming to me to my like,
Robert, natural scent or fragrance?
I'm more into the fragrance, at least initially, and then of course over time that becomes the smells like the natural scent. So fragrance definitely gets me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, fragrance for me as well. All right, body hair or clean shaven?
trimmed,
That's not the game.
clean shaven.
Clean shaven.
Body hair.
Body hair. Okay. Dominant partner or submissive partner?
Both of them. This is a terrible game.
No, you are a terrible participant.
I'm just saying. I don't feel.
Submissive.
Okay. Robert?
Ooh, I kind of like both.
See?
So it depends on the situation. I guess if I had to name one, it would be submissive.
I would say dominant. All right. Sexy music or no music?
Sexy music.
Sexy music.
Sexy music.
No music.
Really?
Oh.
You just in there
I'm bored.
listening to the sounds of New York
I
City?
don't need Brandy ushering in my moment.
Well, no one said it had to be Brandy.
Who said that?
You know, you like Nicki Minaj. So.
Exactly.
I am not playing Pound Town. Remix. All right. Light biting or soft kissing?
Both of them.
Soft kissing.
Soft kissing.
Soft kissing. All right. Slow and sensual or fast and furious?
Slow and sensual. Fast and Furious get you in trouble.
Slow and sensual.
Slow and sensual.
She's the Fast and Furious girl over here.
Fast and Furious. Okay. Morning sex or night sex?
Night.
Night sex.
Night.
Night sex. All right. 2 more. Spontaneous sex or planned sex?
Hello. Anybody in there?
We gotta let them on warm up for this episode.
That's normally me.
I know, like,
Buffering.
I'm kind of thinking
Buffering.
planned, but then like both of them. I don't know. This is not. I don't.
I'm gonna say right now, where I am in this stage of life, planned sex.
Okay.
Spontaneous.
Okay. Planned sex for me. And then last but not least, cuddling after or space after?
Very short cuddle. After.
I'm gonna say cuddle after.
Cuddle.
Okay. Cuddle after. All right. Great. So y'all
That was a
survived
tough
this.
game for Damon.
I mean, I'm gonna try to limit
I
this or
feel
that
like there
questions in the future.
wasn't enough space between the thises and the that's.
Well, it's supposed to be polarized.
Yeah,
You
so I would
pick
just like, because
whatever.
a lot of those questions, I would also say, like, I like multiple of those things, but for the sake of the game, I was just choosing one. But then it's talking about law of attraction, right? So that's like, law of attraction is what I put out into the universe. I'm hoping to attract back to me, right? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So please take a shower before you interact with me. Over here
And
with
I
your,
will. And I'll do the same.
with your sense.
All right. And Robert, a question that we ask all of our guests is, and it can be a serious response, it can be a jovial response, whatever comes to mind. What are you curious about?
Ooh, curious. Well, I like history. And in that, I like learning about people, places, and things. So I think I'm more curious about people and just their lived experience, just where they come from, what they like, what sort of turns them on, or what are the things that they're excited about or interested in. So, so when I see people or meet new people that I'm like, I don't know that person, I am very curious about them and just, where their thoughts are, what do they care about in the world.
Yes, a sociologist.
Let's unpack that. Let's go deeper.
Right. Well, speaking of go deeper, we want to get into this conversation. And to be quite honest and transparent, this was not a topic that I had done a lot of research on prior to having this conversation. And so for anyone who's listening who may not be familiar with HIV criminalization laws, can you just briefly explain what those are in this country?
Yeah, HIV criminalization is a phenomenon that started in the late 80s and 90s when HIV or AIDS at the time was the epidemic was starting. States decided that they were going to implement laws to address the transmission of HIV. Unfortunately, these laws have still remained on the books this long. And what it is that if you're a person living with HIV and you know that you're living with HIV, to say if engaging in any type of sexual activity and you are accused of not disclosing that you're in fact HIV positive, then you can become criminally liable for exposure or alleged transmission of HIV. And so I hesitated there because it varies from state to state, depending on how the laws are drafted. But that is currently that's where it stands. So if you are personally with HIV, perhaps you use a condom when you have sex, perhaps you are in treatment, and perhaps you are able to achieve an undetectable viral load, you can still be criminally liable if for some reason someone says that you exposed them to HIV. Even if you have or with someone and perhaps say they're on PrEP and they didn't know that you were HIV positive, that person can, of course, accuse you of not disclosing it. And so it does, in other words, we don't look at the science. The laws don't look at the science. It doesn't take in consideration whether the person is in treatment or in care. It doesn't take in consideration whether the HIV can be transmitted in these situations. And so there's a lot there that the public don't quite understand, because people think that if you're in fact living with HIV and I touch you or sneeze on you or have sex with you, that you automatically contract HIV. And I'm not saying that a person cannot contract HIV, but there's a lot of things that have to be present. For example, a high viral load, or if the person was not on treatment at all, like just had no type of treatment or whatsoever to impact whether the HIV is transmitted or not. So that's where it stands.
Yeah.
And so therefore, there's really no protection for the person living with HIV in the law, because our HIV status looked at as a weapon.
I think sometimes to help people understand the magnitude of these laws, it's helpful to understand what could actually happen to people. And so I want to give you an opportunity to talk about your personal experience with HIV laws. Tony and I had opportunity to hear this story at the Native Son Gay Black Leadership Forum
yes.
last September. But I think it would be really, really helpful for the audience to hear your experience with that.
Yeah, I'm happy to share, and I should also, because I did leave out some things in terms of HIV criminalization. HIV criminalization, there are HIV-specific laws, and then there's people can be prosecuted under general criminal laws for, like, it can be called assault, it can be called murder, or all sorts of things in other words, laws that exist.
Yeah.
People can be prosecuted on there. And then we have sentence enhancement, meaning that if you, for example, you're a sex worker, and in some jurisdictions, sex work is illegal. But if you are being charged with that and they happen to test you and you happen to test HIV positive, then there's a sentence enhancement that can be enacted in regards to your case. And so whereas a sex worker may get, I don't know what the years, may say a year or 6, I don't know what the sentencing would be, but then it's elevated if you're a person living with HIV. So that's what I'm trying to emphasize. So in terms of my experience, I come from a state in Louisiana, from Shreveport, Louisiana, that has an HIV specific law. So it pertains to people living with HIV in that state. And according to the law, that a person living with HIV is not allowed by any means to to transmit HIV or expose someone to HIV. And so in my situation, I, like many people, I was diagnosed in 2003. And so now I'm 20 years living with HIV. Like many people who are newly diagnosed, they're not automatically given the skills to negotiate how to disclose their status. And I know people are so hung up on that disclosure thing. And it is important. However, it isn't everything. And within the climate that we live in, there's no way for a person to feel safe legally to disclose their status. Because unfortunately, like me, I was involved in a situation where the relationship ended. It was a contentious relationship, so we didn't always see eye to eye on things, which is kind of part of getting to know people. And then the relationship ended. I felt I had disclosed in the beginning of our relationship simply because I remember we negotiated about having sex, whether or not to do it, because we didn't have condoms at that time. And so the relationship continued over 3 months. And so when it ended, a mutual friend of ours, who was more a friend to that person than me, also knew about my status, but they knew because I told them. And somehow my status came back up in this situation after me and this guy broke up. And so they confronted me about it, and I didn't deny it. And unfortunately, this again adds fuel to the fire, because this was a breakup, and this person's already like pissed off about things. And so as a result, the person pressed charges against me. And so to make a long story short, I ended up losing my job. I was arrested at work. I worked at the Court of Appeal for the Second Circuit Court in Louisiana. And so I was arrested at work and had to resign from that. And so my whole livelihood changed. And I had to get an attorney, and I ended up having to overall do 6 months in prison, and also had to register as a sex offender for 15 years in that state. And I am currently still registered as a sex offender, being that I'm in New York, but in New York, they require you to be registered for 20 years. So currently, if I was in Louisiana, I would be getting off the registry this year, technically. Mm-hmm. But because I am living in New York, and there's a whole legal thing behind that, I have 10 more years now to do, simply because I am a resident in this state and I was an out-of-state offender. So that is my experience with that.
Did you know about the criminalization laws prior to that incident? Like, were you aware? Like, I had no idea how, impactful these laws were and have been. I live with HIV. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until about a year ago that I got more privy. Like, I knew vaguely, mm-hmm. but I really didn't know how deep it is. And, and what states have these laws in place.
Yeah. So to answer your question, did I know? No, I was not fully aware of the laws. I didn't even think about the laws at that time. I was 24 years old when I was diagnosed. And so think about yourself being 24. You're not necessarily thinking about laws. I was dealing with my diagnosis in terms of just how to live with it, how to manage and how to move on with life. What is life, navigating those relationships. But no, did I know the law in the way that I understand it today? No, I did not. And that's even more reason why I speak out about this, because the assumption is that when you're diagnosed, you're just supposed to know what to do.
Or that the doctor might tell you.
Oh, and that's another thing too. I just posted something on LinkedIn about this, about how our medical doctors or providers should be doing more addressing these laws. That's the thing, that people who should be aware of these laws, you think will want to inform us, are not doing a very good job at it. Now, case managers or what have you, social workers, they have wide caseloads and everything, and I'm sure they have great intent to look out for their people, but where's the time to really talk about something like this? And if they do mention it to you, you're probably a person that's still in a state of shock about just being diagnosed and living with HIV, that it may not be registering. And this is a situation that you really have to sit down with a person and explain. Now, you walk out this door and you go to your family, friends, or whomever, and you have these encounters with someone, if they understand your status. Because I want to say, it's not always just about sex. It can just be an encounter, with law enforcement, or if we're talking sometimes spit pops out of our mouth, right? It's not, there's some people may choose to spit on people, but that's not a favorable behavior. But there are instances how people's attitudes, we act like people are so okay with, oh yeah, we understand HIV, oh, we're good, but they're not. Right. People will, you think you know someone until they're faced with HIV, and then you really find out who that person is, or how people are, how they react to something. So that's why I think that we are so stuck on disclosure, but can a person trust you to be able to share this sensitive information with you? When someone tells you that they have cancer, they have high blood pressure, they have all these other things, people are like, oh, I'm so sorry, but when it comes to HIV, we're like, oh.
Yeah.
So why is that?
Yeah.
I also think it's people not taking ownership over their own care. We focus so much on disclosure as if there are not means for you to protect yourself fully.
Right, and that the onus of responsibility is not put on the person living with HIV to only do what they have to do for themselves, but also look out for you too. Now, I agree that we all should be disclosing all sorts of things to each other, but when it comes to this particular issue, it's why are we buying into this narrative that if we are being exposed to HIV, oh my God, you're a bad person, you're a dangerous person, you're trying to take my life. I can see that if you're some person that's not informed about HIV, because if you're acting like that, I can look at you and tell that you are not as informed as you should be. Not saying that you shouldn't have no fear. I'm just saying that the way that we carry on, you can kind of tell a lot about a person in terms of their understanding and knowledge about something.
Sorry.
And I was gonna say, I also think it stems from the history of how HIV was handled in this country. If we were talking about states putting these preventative, stop the spread, whatever laws on the books, but at the same time, President Reagan didn't say the word AIDS for 3-4 years into this, and so he was forced to. And if we take COVID again as the example, I'm not saying in any way Trump was a good president or handled this appropriately, but it would be like if he went through his entire presidency and never said COVID and acted like it was not happening.
In fact, he did. He just didn't take it very seriously.
He didn't take it seriously.
And we've had millions of people.
But even just say the word. That is the extent to which HIV and AIDS was kind of brushed under the rug. So then you have people coming of age during this time, living through this, seeing people dying. No one's talking about it appropriately. No one's informing people en masse.
Yeah.
Those people now have children who are grown adults who are being raised by people who lived through that experience that were not. So it's this cycle of misinformation.
Yeah, and I remember leaving the clinic when I found out and was diagnosed and was, provided with some literature, and I didn't read that shit because I was like you said, in a state of shock. What am I going to do?
Right.
And that is what kind of, I was bogged down with that. And I had no idea about these laws. Like, that's a whole, maybe it was in that literature. Maybe it wasn't. But I don't know, like you said, when's the point in which that information is provided? Because that would have probably impacted how I navigated disclosing
Absolutely.
in those younger years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also think about like healthcare generally. Like if you got a cancer diagnosis, no one would expect you to go home and read the cancer pamphlet to figure out how you need to care for yourself and what you need to do for the next 6 months to a year. Like you receive treatment, you receive support. There are counselors and things that help with all of those things. And I think that we need to start talking about and treating HIV in the same way that we treat any long-term medical diagnosis.
Yeah. And it's a chronic manageable disease. And again, we have everything that we need. And so therefore, we shouldn't be prosecuting people at all. And I wanted to be clear, I am in favor of decriminalization. And somebody always say, well, what about those? What about those ones? Well, what I'm talking about is the millions of people that are living with HIV, and not the millions of people are not trying to out here be criminals, not trying to have felonies, not trying to be on anybody's sex offender registries. You know, they are not. And this issue really is a HIV justice. It's a racial justice issue because of the fact that it, impacts our community, not just those particularly in the South, but just as a racial justice issue in terms of community, whether you're in the Midwest or wherever states you're in, the more likely it's our community that's being prosecuted.
Yeah, and I was thinking about when you were talking about like there I think should be some level of criminalization, but it has to, for me, it matters your intent, the person's intent behind it. That I think at the crux of what should be a differentiator when it comes down to these laws that are so outdated.
Yeah, and that I'm glad you said that piece, because the way in some jurisdictions, for example, in Louisiana, I was at a hearing in April. I have not spoken in Louisiana in a long time, especially to that particular body of people. Now I've gone and spoke to community and public health people. So that was a moment for me as a person who was criminalized in that state, and to be able to speak to this criminal justice committee about something that happened to me regarding laws that they enforce, but yet they're not informed about. The way, the lens in which people are looked at living with HIV, I left there feeling just disgusted and not as a human. And what I mean by that is that their view of us is through sexual violence. They see us, the fact of us living with HIV and exposing someone to it, as sexual violence. And there's a difference between sexual assault and a sexual offense. When I'm talking about HIV specific laws, I'm talking about sex offense, not a sexual assault. That is when you rape somebody or molestations, all those things, what sexual assault is. But a sexual offense is different. It's a more broader term that encompasses sexual assault, but it's a much broader category of offenses, and HIV just happens to be one of those things that are there. So I wanted to make the distinction because people automatically go for, you're sexual assaulting me, you raped me. Now, if there's the act of rape, then that's separate from the fact that if that individual is living with HIV. Because right now, we conflate the two. And so therefore, if someone is involved with someone that's being accused of exposing them to HIV, they're automatically assumed to be harming them with their HIV. No, they're raping you. Like, there are laws to address rape. And so, but instead, some of these legislators or way people look at it, try to conflate the two.
Yeah.
And so that's a problem. That's problematic.
Even for, I was shocked to read that 14 states, they still criminalize actions such as spitting. And to me, it comes from a place of just having a very outdated outlook on the transmission of HIV, and it completely disregards science.
Right.
And for instances like that, I was just shocked to know why those laws haven't been reformed, and it's 2024. Like, what's taken so long for those laws to be reformed that are so obviously and boldly incorrect?
It's because of the political realities in which we live in these states. I want folks to understand that there are legislators They're conservatives, they're evangelicals, they're all these things. They're homophobic, transphobic, like all the biases that carry. These are our leaders. These are people who also are our leaders, and these are the people who make decisions about us. And from what I see, they're not really interested in us being free, being liberated from HIV. They're not interested in us being liberated from these laws, any laws really. And that's what's unfortunate. These are the people that we allow to be in office to continue to uphold and enforce this misinformation. And that is why, it's taking a lot, because in this work, we call ourselves coming to these people saying, oh, Mr. Legislator, please hear our cause, and it's doing this, and this guy's like, I don't care.
Yep.
I really don't care. And so these people are leading with their biases, and so it makes our work a lot harder, and it makes change a lot harder. And these are the same folks that want to keep you criminalized, but then these be the same people that come into office and ready to cut budgets and which cuts prevention and cut all the things that you need to support you, but then on the other hand, want to uphold laws to be able to prosecute you. So you can't do both. You can't do prevention and prosecute. You got to pick one. And that's why it's taking a long time, because we're fighting against biases. We're fighting against people who use their values and try to use that as a way of upholding and enforcing laws and to control people. And that's another aspect. Is if we can keep the laws, we can control them better.
Yeah, and I something you just said, also thinking about prevention and prosecution. Like I was recently, my husband was looking up costs for his HIV medicine, and he's, again, I say this whenever I mention him, he's talked about it publicly, so not disclosing any information that's not public knowledge, but we were looking at it like pre-insurance. It was like $20 copay. The fucking HIV medicine was $4,000 without insurance
a month.
Yes, so like that's the context for. And luckily, like, we live New York adjacent, so there are programs and things to support. But in certain areas, they're not. And the same people that manage the budgets to support said programs, if there aren't private entities in certain areas, are the same people in these laws on the books.
Yeah, I want people to understand. And, I know folks are working and trying to live their lives and be a boss and be all that stuff, but there's things that are happening around you. You don't know when your life might be changed by these things. I didn't know that my life would be changed by HIV. I wasn't even thinking about it. Yes, I was young and gay. I wasn't even sure about being gay. I was coming into that knowledge. So there are things I've had to learn, and there's things I've had to experience. Would I want to go through that again? No, but I recognize the importance of it, because no one's really talking about it in a way to help us be informed, help us be prepared for the things that will happen in our lives. And as a Black gay man growing up in the South, a Christian and all that, I wish I had more people to tell me about these issues. But our folks weren't talking about this stuff. But instead, I had to live it. I had to go through it. And I will say, when I learned about my diagnosis, I didn't blame anybody. I didn't have room or space to do that. And it's because I see now that there were bigger issues here. The person that pressed charges against me, I don't have any animosity towards them, because I recognize this issue is bigger than the both of us. He's Black and gay too, so things can happen in our lives, but we have to pay attention. It's why it's important to vote and understand if people are supporting issues that you may not. As a man, you may not think abortion matters to you, but it probably matters to your sister, your mother, your grandmother, your aunt, your cousins, or somebody. So we have to pay attention to issues that are not just about us, but just our community, our people, because you never know the day when your life may be changed by something. And this sort of going back and forth with each other, that is by design. They want the government, or the people that support these laws, want to use us to be able to identify other people living with HIV. Because they're like, well, we set the laws, but the public is going to help us identify those folks. And that's really what this is about. It's really about identifying who's living with HIV, so that we can again control them and put them away.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the theme of this like collective responsibility that we all have to make society a more inclusive place. And so the question that I want to ask is, knowing that it's all of our responsibility, people living with and without HIV, to reduce the stigma, how can we create a safer environment for folks living with HIV? And so this could be a political response, this could be a communal response, but I'm just curious how we all think that we can help that.
Yeah, I have to encourage people to get informed, read. Education is the key here. I've had to learn over a decade all the things that I didn't know what was happening to me. I had to go back and figure out, why is this happening? Or why did it happen? And I'm still doing it, which is why I'm able to see here and share with you all. It's no excuse for folks not knowing the things that they need to know today with the way technology is. So education is key. I can't stress it enough. You can't talk about HIV criminalization if you don't even understand the basics around HIV. And I stand on that, because people come with all the what ifs, and it's like, well, if you understand the science, then you would know that that's something it's not liable to happen or what have you. But yet they have all these. So education is key, and in that way, then you can start looking at people differently and understanding, like, oh wow, I see what they're dealing with. And I want to say get involved, and what I mean by that is, start having conversations, talk to each other about these things, learn what HIV criminalization is and what it's not. But we got to start having more compassion for people, and so education and compassion, those are the things that I will offer at this. I mean, it would take us a whole day if I just went down the line of what people should be doing, but really the education and just showing a little bit more compassion and understanding that everything that you think you hear and see is not what it appears to be. Like, for example, in the media, if someone's being put out there, oh, they're doing this and doing that, do they ever come back and tell you, oh, this person was in treatment. Oh, this person had an undetectable viral load. Oh, this person didn't actually transmit HIV to this person. And I want to emphasize that a lot of these cases, there is no transmission. People are just being prosecuted for just, again, the perceived exposure. So in other words, there's no harm that's being done. Yeah, you might feel some kind of way if someone didn't tell you anything, but did you contract HIV from this person? Yeah, and if you did not, then should this person be charged with a felony, and put in prison, and in, depending on what state you're in, put on the sex offender registry? So compare the weight of that. Treat like harms alike.
Yeah, I was like on the topic of disclosure. When it comes to that, I was thinking to myself that if I'm undetectable, I don't feel that I necessarily have to disclose my status to someone else. Now, after having this conversation, I would change my thought process on that just based on wanting to know the law. Because just because I feel that I'm undetectable, which means untransmittable, so I don't have to, in my mind, disclose that to you. However, I need to go back and make sure I do my due diligence, because the law may say otherwise.
Yeah, and also it depends on who you're dealing with. I tell gay people or people living with HIV, we might have to slow our roll with how we engage with folks. Yes, that person looks good, and there may be all these other qualities about them, but where do they stand on HIV? Where do they stand on sexual health? And if they are ignorant in those areas, that's probably not the person you want to have sex with. It's probably not the person you may feel good sharing anything with, So I think people, to your question, people should check themselves. Are you someone that folks can trust you with any information?
Yeah. And then also when it comes to our, doing our part, I think what I would like to see is our medical providers do their part, because that information needs to happen at that level. I don't know when, but there needs to be some process in place that allows for that information to be shared. I also think, similar to what Robert is saying about having compassion, politics is personal, and so until something happens to you directly, it's like you don't think about it. But when you sit back and realize these things impact you too, so don't wait until something happens to you or a family member or a friend before you decide to show up and be an advocate. Actually do your part now, because it's it's a humanity thing.
And these leaders, some of them they're not looking out for us. So we have to look out for each other. And that's why I'm here too, to bring this message, because I'm looking out for us, as well as many others that are involved in this work, in this movement. We're looking out for each other because we recognize that if these folks wanted to get rid of HIV, or if they want to get rid of these laws, they would have done it. They would have done it. And the question is, why haven't they done it?
Yeah.
Why haven't they done it? Because they don't care. They do not care. And if the same people that want to uphold laws, but then turn around and be the same people that want to cut budgets so that to prevent you from getting the care and the resources that you need, that is not a person that cares about you. You know, and if they want to use their religion and their faith as a way of justifying, that person doesn't care about you. You know, so it's important to be mindful of who you're having sex with, what do they know, where they are on sexual health, and then also the people that are elected into office, where do they care about issues that really impact you?
Well, we talk about that this season. Like, folks need to have conversations.
What I was going to say actually is that I think the conversation around sexual health should just be more holistic. Like, if you're going to be in a place where you and a partner, or whatever variation of partner, are going to engage in that way, the conversation is not just, are you positive or not? Or the conversation is, okay, HIV status, okay, are you on treatment? Are you, as a person that is negative, am I taking PrEP or not? Am I using condoms or not? Am I going to have a PEP? Am I going to get a PEP prescription afterwards or at some point? Am I getting tested regularly? Like, the whole thing,
Yes.
I'm just like, you get syphilis, you go and treat with that. That shit can kill you too.
Yeah.
So, like, it's not just like you hit the one, I said earlier in the season, like, the one big bad. That's how people think about HIV.
Yeah.
And now it's over. Like, cool. Everything else we can sort out. No, it's just like, how do we have the holistic conversation about health?
Absolutely.
Because just like you can get treated for chlamydia, you can be treated for HIV, and you can keep living. And I think that you treat the whole conversation and how you're bringing both parts of, or multiple partners, however you want to do the thing, how all of you all are talking about it, that to me is the best way to reduce stigma, because you're not just like putting 90% of the focus on HIV and then maybe we'll talk about the other 10%, who cares?
Right.
And I think that is what stigmatizes it a lot. We think about HIV as like this thing.
Absolutely.
And then everything else, who cares?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that if you just have a more holistic conversation where like all the parts, the pieces make up the whole, and you acknowledge that, then like that takes away, I think a lot of that stigma around, oh my God, the big scary thing.
We need to support each other. I've heard people say, oh, I'm trying to stop that person. Well, you can't stop somebody if you're coming at them, you know, like, I see you, I know what you're doing. You know, we've all seen that, folks posting on social media and all these things. That's not the way to reach that person. And I know you may feel in good intentions of stopping them. You might want to connect with them in a different kind of way and say, hey, I see this, or I understand that. You know, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what's going on, because people need support. They need support. They don't need someone, they don't need punishment. They need support. And if there's situations where HIV is a factor, then we really need to sit down and sort of break that down and realize like where the support is needed. And if someone is intentionally saying, I want to do this, which is not every day, it's not everybody, it's not the millions, then we have laws in place that can address that. But to assume that a community of people living with HIV are just out to get me or out to harm others, whether the status is disclosed or not, that is not how you should look at this.
Yeah, I mean, the laws are so discriminatory. The CDC also went on record to note that because of these laws, they're not seeing a increase in disclosure. They're seeing that people feel discouraged about getting tested in general because of what these laws and how they can impact their life. And it's also obviously increasing stigma, which is what we're talking about. And you all mentioned a lot of really, really strong points. The one point that I wanted to bring up is a little bit different in a way that we can reduce stigma, is about correcting problematic language.
Yes.
And so we talked about this earlier in our season. We had an episode specifically talking about STD and STI stigma. But I have a very visceral reaction to people who use health reads or people who come at people's health status as a point to insult them. We all need to speak up when we see those things happening. I think a recent example that I'm proud of our community for was when DaBaby performed at Rolling Loud. I think it was in 2021. He made those really insulting comments about people living with HIV, queer people living with HIV. And I saw the community rise up and really, really speak out against that. And I just want to encourage people in the community to not just target celebs, but also your close friends, your family,
everybody,
and really speak up when those conversations are happening, because these laws are obviously, they're taking a very, very long time to be reformed. And so we have to make sure that on the community level, to your point, Robert, that we have compassion and that we're being mindful about how we're talking about it, so that people living with HIV feel comfortable talking about their status, finding community, and people who are newly diagnosed feel like, you know, it's not doomsday.
Yes.
And so I think that we can all help at the community level by just being mindful of our language and also checking people who aren't doing the same.
Yeah, absolutely. That language piece is key, because I hear folks saying infected. We don't say infected. They may say it scientifically, but we as a community, we shouldn't be saying that. You either contract HIV or HIV is transmitted, but say infected, we're not saying, oh, full-blown AIDS. That's not a thing. So if you didn't know that and you're using that, stop it. You sound ignorant. Full-blown AIDS is not a thing. I know they said it back in the day, but it's not a thing.
Yeah.
So just those few words definitely can make a difference when we use the proper language to talk about this.
Yeah. Well, Robert, this was a very insightful and informative conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your very personal story with us and also educating us on the reality of these laws. At this point, I want to give you an opportunity, if there's any way that people can learn more about the work that you're doing, or you can direct them to some resources to get involved, this would be the opportunity for you to do so.
Yeah, thank you so much. I actually just launched a website. You can follow me on robertsuttle.com. I actually am on Facebook. I am on Instagram at Subtle Vision. Also on X, formerly known as Twitter, as Subtle Points. I'll actually be launching a blog soon, so you'll be able to learn a little bit more insights about my personal experience as well as the work that I'm doing. You can also follow multiple organizations out there. I'm also chair of the I work with the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, so I'm chair of the Council of Justice Leaders. And so we have a major campaign that HIV is not a crime, or Stuck in the 80s campaign that we're doing. This is the 4th year, I believe. Also, the Health Not Prisons Collective, which is a collective of national organizations that I've had the pleasure of working with over a decade. Positive Women's Network, the Zero Project, Counter Narrative Project, the Transgender Law Center, and there's the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus. And so these are organizations that have been steady, represent communities of people living with HIV that are also impacted by HIV criminalization. And there's also a global level. I'm also on the global advisory panel for the HIV Justice Network. So there are people around the world that are doing this work as well. So we're out there. Follow us, follow these organizations on social media, get involved. They're very active in various states. There's statewide coalitions that exist now. We actually have the HIV is Not a Crime Training Academy, the first and only conference in the U.S. about HIV criminalization. It's happening in next year, probably May or June of next year. So look these things up. They're on Google. If you follow me, you'll learn about these things over time. And so there's so many ways that you can get involved, and there is no excuse. And if you don't get involved, at least continue to stay educating yourself now that you're aware of this issue.
Absolutely. So you have those resources, go check them out. And that's all the time that we have this week. If you enjoyed this episode, let's keep the conversation going. Let us know your thoughts and questions at surfacelevelpodcast.com. And remember, stay curious.